Keynote to
Well, we've got 5, so if you've got 4 seats, you may as well have 4 mics. Should do that?
Yeah, that's great. Oh, wonderful. And does everybody know how to just turn them on and off?
Disable that, so.
I'll start from here.
Very good.
What's that?
Pins. Like what?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Might as well. You click the slides.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. For Roland, all of them, really. No, do we not permit? Maybe put it on the. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Warm welcome. I'm Simon O'Connell, CEO of SMV, and I'm going to interrupt the great conversations. And I have the impossible task of trying to keep us to time when we've got two wonderful keynote speakers, two panels of three or two people, and then some concluding remarks. But wonderful to be with you all, friends, colleagues, distinguished ministers. The session is Pathways to Financing, Scaling and Accelerating NDC Ambitions to Energy and Food Systems Transformation. So we've really got three key messages that we want to underscore in this session from our distinguished panelists. The first is to reinforce the need to move towards sustainable future food systems. The second is how do we mobilize investment in local solutions, initiatives, and delivery models? And the third one is to invest in an ecosystem of products and services. We've got some wonderful experts from the relevant areas are going to share some thoughts from us on how exactly we're going to do this. But I just want to contextualize in about 90 seconds, if I can. I was in Akure in southwest Nigeria about 3 weeks ago. My organization, SMV, we're a part of an extraordinary thing called 2Scale, financed by our good friends in the Dutch government. It's the largest inclusive agri-business incubator, I'm told, in Africa. I saw a cocoa producer, frankly pretty large scale, and cocoa is one of the hugest, as Vivian, you will know, commodities in Nigeria. And the people I met with, the CEO of the board, they were telling me, Simon, in the context of the climate crisis, what is happening is rather than your cocoa arriving all in one go at one time, it's coming in a little bit slower, lower volumes over time, because in some parts it's a bit warmer and paradoxically perhaps in some other parts it's a little bit cooler. So whilst they're still running their energy at full capacity, they're not producing the cocoa at the same time in the same volume, so their costs have gone up. So they need different forms of financing. They need to flow through different forms of financing to those smallholder farmer cocoa producers. To do that, they need better forms of financing. They need loans, and then they need to have smaller ticket sizes to on-lend to those smallholder farmers so that they can get more sustainable energy capacity into their cocoa production. And they're dealing with the 4x challenges, of course, because in Nigeria is experiencing huge pressures. So to help us understand what we can do as partners in such a context, I'm going to go to you first, Vivian, if I may. So Vivian, if you'd like to come up here. Vivian Maduke, you are the program coordinator at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. You're the expert in this area, so please take the floor to give us some key remarks and welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, okay, good. I'm going to use a few slides to, emphasize my keynote. I wouldn't say keynote, more of an encouragement and challenge to all of us about what do we invest in, how do we invest. And the great thing about what we're looking at today is we're not just looking at financing, we're also looking at NDCs, which means it has a lot to do with public sector finance, but also private sector finance. And mobilizing finance starts with the right plans, the right NDCs. How ambitious is it? How much does it understand and connect the food and energy system? And also, what we found last year was that over 70% of country NDCs do not adequately incorporate food systems. Now, 2 days ago, there was a leaders' declaration on food systems. And fortunately, countries are committing to doing that in the next 2 years. Now, for me, I'm not as excited as most of us are. Why? Because the plans need to be ambitious enough. The plans need to acknowledge our food systems' reliance on fossil fuels. And when I say our food systems, our industrialized, extractive food systems at the moment is dependent on fossil fuels. And beyond the ambitious plans, when money and financial flows are allocated to the plans, that's where the real action is, right? So I encourage our excitement, but at the same time, I want to see more and more financial flows to the right things to back up those plans. So with that, when I speak about financing, last year we did an assessment where we saw that only 3% of climate finance goes to food systems, even though food systems contribute 33% of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, what that means is that there's a need not just to increase the financing, but also to shift the kind of financing going into food systems. We also found out that a majority of the financing at the moment, that's part of the 3%, is going to the wrong things. Is going to subsidies on agrochemicals, is going to subsidies on beef and livestock. So we have a challenge with us here where we don't just need an increase in finance, we also need a change in what the financing is used for. Now, this is quite a busy slide, but one thing I want you to pick up here is the 15%. Now, part of our assessment this year, we looked at how dependent our food system is at the moment, and we found out that 15% of fossil fuel use is in food systems. So whatever investment we are making, whatever plans we are making in the NDCs have to consider that dependence on fossil fuels. Another key message I want us to leave this place with is it's impossible to transform food systems without us thinking about how can we phase out fossil fuels and vice versa. So the investments we are making, the plans we are making have to be in such a way that we're phasing out fossil fuels. Now, the question here is, some of us might not understand how is food related to fossil fuels. Now, at the moment, the energy intensity of our food systems is really high, and I'm going to talk about in a few minutes why we're having an increased energy intensity. Now, our energy intensity is increasing for various reasons. The first one is the increased mechanization. Now, we're not against mechanization. However, we need to find a way to fuel the energy that will be needed for mechanization. The second reason why we are having an increased energy intensity is because of the growing use of fossil fuel-based inputs. So the agrochemicals, the fertilizers, the pesticides, all of these are substrates from fossil fuels. And we have an industry that knows that we're coming after them, and they're looking for alternative markets. And part of those markets include plastics, fertilizers, pesticides. So for all the investors in the room, how do we make sure that our investments are not consolidating an industry that we want to move away from? Also, globalized supply chains, as we import and export, that in itself racks up miles or greenhouse gas emissions from transport. So how do we encourage localized global chains? As well, the growing demand for meat and dairy. We were having a brief conversation now about milk use from one of the investors in the room about milk, dairy. But the fact that there is a growing demand for meat and dairy is driving up our dependence on fossil fuels. So how do we find a way out of that? As well, the growing sales of ultra-processed foods. Now, let me make it clear. We are not against processing. But we're having a challenge of ultra-processed foods. And the more you process food, the more the energy intensity you require. And the problem is if we transition from fossil fuels towards renewables without driving down the overall intensity, we're going to have unintended consequences. And we're already seeing that. For example, we're seeing where food is being used as biofuels. We're even seeing now, I'm sure we've heard in the news, the scramble for minerals for renewables. So that means if we do not drive down our overall intensity, we're going to shift and create more problems in the renewable space. Another interesting aspect is new food trends such as alternative meats. I know we're all excited about it, maybe not all of us, but many of us, even at COP, about the opportunity. There is an opportunity, but we have to approach it with a lot of caution. Because even from our assessment, you can see from the slide here, actually, alternative proteins have a greater energy intensity. Yes, it might give us save us from the greenhouse gas emissions from methane, which is great, right? But let's make sure that the energy intensity isn't erasing all the gains we got from methane, right? As well, the vested interests. How do we ensure that the investments we are making in the alternatives, including the renewables, including the shift in diets, that is not consolidating the corporations, that is truly thinking about rural economy, is truly thinking about the just transition. And these are cliches, but to be honest, we want solutions that are empowering people and not corporations. So that's something we need to consider. This slide is just trying to show, please go through our report. We just launched this report about power shift, why we need to wean off our food systems from fossil fuels. Feel free to go through the report, it's quite in-depth. But this slide just covers some of the positive and negative interactions between the food and energy system. Now you can see on the right here, it's quite tiny, an example of agricultural land used for energy production. So the agrovoltaics or solar energy in the farms. It can be a great thing because for farmers, they can be shifted out of energy poverty. They can have clean energy transition. But at the same time, remember what I said, if we don't drive down the general energy intensity, we're going to have issues like the energy companies pricing out farmers. We're going to have issues such as infringement on rights, disruption of local food systems. And we never want to get to a point where food and energy systems are competing for natural resources. Right? Because the energy guys they have more bucks. That's the truth. They have more money. As well, you can see on the right-hand side, biogas production from livestock manure. It's an opportunity to use food waste, right? But at the same time, if not managed properly, if our investments are not well thought through, it can start having unintended consequences like locking in industrial livestock. Because imagine if you set up a plant that uses manure to generate energy. You want to produce more manure to keep it powered, isn't it? So that can lock in a certain system in place. So we need to think about all of this as we finance. This slide also shows the various interactions. It's quite detailed, so please, you can go to our website, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, and find more detail. But this just shows the interaction between inputs, land use, processing, and waste, and how the food and energy systems interact. Now, this is the slide that we all need to pay more attention to, because I do believe this slide should kickstart an interesting conversation. Now, the first one is ambitious NDCs are the starting point. Why do I say so? The government stimulates what private sector invests in. They can either create incentives or disincentives based on what is in the NDC. So given that we have between now and 2025, how can we make the NDCs more effective, more ambitious? And how can we back up the adequate funding flows? Knowing fully well that private sector money can never be as much as public sector. So even for all of us in the room that are, have private funding, philanthropy funding, how do we make sure that we are backing the funding flows, increasing it, but also directing it to the right place? Now, what does that mean, to direct it to the right place? The first one is phasing out fossil fuel-based agrochemicals. That's a starting point. So if you have investments, that lock in fertilizers, pesticides, then it's time to start transitioning towards agroecological and regenerative practices, both for farmers, helping them de-risk, but also helping them scale these practices. The next one is the investments we make have to support plant-rich diets. Now, I didn't say vegan diets. That's part of it. However, remember what I talked about when it comes to rural economy. Let's make sure that it's equitable, that investments encourage plant-rich diets and minimally processed foods. Because some of the alternatives are actually ultra-processed. So let's make sure that there's that balance between health goals, nutrition goals, and climate goals. Shifting towards renewable-based cooling and heating system, because we know that we will need energy to get us the advancements we want in food. So we need to shift to renewable-based food processing as well. And we need to encourage our government to review the policies on biogas, be mindful of corporate consolidation in your investments, that it truly empowers people and not corporations. And finally, think about the just transition and equitable governance. I hope these few things would have kicked up an interesting thought process for us as we continue. Thank you.
Wonderful, Vivian. Thank you so much. So you know, if you want detail, you want substance, you know who to talk to after our panel ends in a bit. Thank you so much, Vivian. So if I can invite up our first three distinguished panelists. So Honourable State Minister Bwino for Agriculture of Uganda, if you kindly come and take your place up here. My good friend Rennie Van Hel, Director for Inclusive Green Growth, Ambassador for Sustainable Development, and the Arctic Ambassador at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and Pedro Chilambe, co-lead CGIAR Initiative on Climate Resilience, Climate Finance. Warm welcome and thank you so much for joining us. So turning to you first, if I may, State Minister. How has the government of Uganda mobilized and aligned public finance to implement the NDCs and specific targets across these interconnected sectors? And if you can kindly keep your remarks to about 3 or 4 minutes, we would be very grateful. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. I may take maybe 2 minutes. First of all, I thank the first speaker for triggering off this debate. And in her remarks, she said that food systems and energy systems are intertwined fundamentally. And I want to say that they are actually Siamese twins. They are twins. And of course, we know that energy in food systems is used for different activities along the value chain: production, processing, transportation, handling, and so on and so forth. Now, in my country, we recognize that there is need to transition to renewable energy. Unfortunately, Uganda just recently discovered and has been processing, and we are about to start exploiting petroleum. And to me, this is a paradox for the country. However, I want to tell you that we are firm. We have a roadmap towards transitioning. We have actually formed a climate finance unit within the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development with a mandate of climate finance mobilization as a national designated authority and ensure that there is multi-sectoral participation internally in the mobilization of finances for to finance climate change. Secondly, the government, through our local development bank, the Uganda Development Bank, put up or created a climate financing facility. We have not stopped at creating the facility, but we have also put seed money there to a tune of 13 million Uganda shillings. And this is basically to finance low carbon and climate resilient investments in Uganda. And to us, that's a fundamental signal that we are serious about this. But besides that, we have also a number of interventions that we have put in place to contribute to the implementation of NDCs. And these include the following. One, we have started an electric automobile industry in Uganda, particularly to manufacture electric vehicles, electric tractors, to provide farm power without depending on non-renewable energy. We have a company, a government company called Keynote Motors that is currently making electric automobiles, including electric tractors. But we have also come up with a 300 million US dollar annual disbursement to the local farmers at the lowest level to ensure that our farmers enhance organic or regenerative agriculture at that level. And finally, we have taken a deliberate and a deliberate decision to emphasize this NDC partnership. We have actually come up with an NDC partnership plan that we are implementing so that we keep track, but also take advantage of the networking of the NDC partnership to mobilize technical and financial resources to further our objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you. And so turning to you, Rene, perhaps you could tell us a bit about, so how does the Netherlands look at scaling finance for the food and energy sectors, and any examples of any particular projects that you think we could learn from?
Sorry. Yeah, thank you for that question. First and foremost, I wanted to say that everything that Vivian said, we conceptually embrace. And of course, what is now the challenge is also to implement it. And I'm in the lucky position that I have water, energy, food, climate, and biodiversity in my directorate, and we have about 800 million per year to spend on it. So we're really increasingly looking for these interactions and interlinkages between these things. Of course, we all understand that in some cases you need public finance, in some cases it's mixed, and in some cases there's leeway for the private sector. In order to live up to our goal for 1.8 billion climate finance, we announced, for example, that we're now partnering with IFAD, and we have a replenishment of 150 million. We're doing a lot with CGIAR, 110 million on loss and damage, 15 million for the setting up the fund, and the ARC, which is an organization based in Pretoria, if I'm correct. We're doing 25 million. So we're investing a lot in all these things. But what actually concerns me somehow the most is that being a reliable partner and a transparent partner, I see that we're doing so many things. The World Bank is thinking of global challenge programs. We're coming up with all kinds of things. And who brings structure into all those beautiful things on a country level in order to really generate much more money? The money that is needed to speed up, rightfully, what every citizen of any country in Africa wants: more sustainable growth, more wealth, a more respectful way of being able to live. So that is a bit of a challenge, and I think that we really have to work on that. And because it's only when we because the World Bank brings something, we bring something, NDC partnership brings something. So we have to sort of bring those elements together in order to truly generate things, and not to sort of work on all these beautiful little projects that at the end of the day don't generate any change. So that is basically the philosophy of where we're going and what we're working on. For example, in a beautiful country like that of yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Rene. So some optimism and clearly still some complexity around how we put the partnership puzzle better together. So perhaps, Pedro, you might be able to help us with that one. You've recently published your breakthrough report within CGIAR. So what within the report or from the report, what do you see as the immediate opportunities within the food and energy nexus that need financing, and any really nice examples of successful bankable projects that we can learn from?
Thank you very much, Simon. And I think that colleagues here have really set the scene for a lot of what the Breakthrough Agenda looks to propose as actions to reach and arrive at climate-resilient agriculture food systems by 2030. And I think the first point that we need to put out and that we have been trying to make clear in the past few days here is that there is a very large importance in investing in research and development. If we're going to reach our goals, we definitely need to find innovative solutions that are going to help us reach methane reduction in livestock systems. We're definitely going to have to continue, as Vivian said, to explore alternative proteins and other sources that can provide us with those nutritious benefits that we do get from these proteins, but also looking at minimizing food loss and reducing food waste is also something that we definitely need to look at as we're moving into a more climate resilient future. But also looking at how we can boost finance, because at the end of the day, for us to actually to be able to implement initiatives across the food and energy nexus, it requires finance not only at the macro level, but especially at the micro level when we're actually trying to support smallholder farmers in being able to afford the energy solutions and especially the renewable energy solutions that they actually require for both production, processing, and also for storage. So looking at these areas, we also do need to sort of make sure that we're focusing on finance. And to do that, we need to bring in both the public and private sector to collaborate in order to make sure that we're able to de-risk using public finance, the private finance that is required to actually bring this innovation to scale and making sure that we're supporting both the smallholder farmers, but also the small, medium enterprises that we can work with to actually deliver these solutions that are being generated through the research. So there's many touch points that are required to bring these solutions to the ground. Now, when you speak about examples of successful investments, the agriculture sector has a big potential due to the scale at which agriculture is actually exerted. If we look at solar irrigation potential in most countries, you go to a country like Ethiopia where we have about 7 million hectares of irrigatable land. You look at Zambia, which of course on a different scale has about like 500,000 hectares of irrigatable land. And you find innovative solutions and SMEs that are bringing pay-as-you-go solar irrigation solutions that are more affordable. We're talking about solar systems that we are supporting partners in making sure that these have lower capital investment requirements for farmers, such as solar irrigation systems that do not require batteries. And the pay-as-you-go model is one that is very effective for the bottom of the pyramid, as you are usually depending on money that comes in on a daily basis. And this allows for the farmer to be able to accessibly access these technologies. Some good examples are sun culture in Kenya. You have Lima Links that is doing something very similar in Zambia. And these are some of the examples that we can look at. Sun Culture has been able to raise, I think in 2016, about $40 million to expand this, and about $12 million this year as well to expand this, having sold over 45,000 units up to now. And the market in Kenya itself is something that will grow. In Kenya, you also now have another, as this investment opportunity sort of grows, you also have Stable Foods that has a model that is more community-based. So mini grid systems for solar irrigation that are actually that is actually creating access for larger communities. So there is viable investments in this area, and it's definitely something that we need to look at.
Great. So some optimism there from you, Pedro. Thank you so much. So we're going to do a little dance up here. I think is say a round of applause to our panelists as you leave us, and as you step off the panel, please, we will invite Carol Walzak, the Senior Sustainability Strategy Advisor from FMO, for our second keynote speech, to talk a little bit about the current practices to reduce food waste, to reduce fossil fuel dependency. So Carol, welcome, and over to you. Thank you.
Simon. Yeah, I'm going to talk about something a little bit of a different angle. And it's about, also scaling finance and thinking about that as well, which is something that FMO is quite involved with. And I want to draw first on some points that were made already, and maybe starting with you, Vivian, and this was mentioned before by the Honourable Minister. The first thing we need in finance is one thing we need, let's say, is a good roadmap. So indeed, the NDC and the NDC process is so important because from a mitigation perspective, every country's journey will be unique, right? And we really want to know, as FMO now, what can we do to support you on your decarbonization journey? Or even in some low-income countries, it's going to be an increase in emissions actually to 2030 from what we see, because as you grow in a low-emission way, what does it look like for you? And this is so important to telling everybody about how you're going to act going forward and how we should act. And the same for resilience. So actually, resilience is almost always context specific. And so we really need to know from you, what are the solutions you need locally that we can support? And that way, we will also be directing our efforts that way. And finally, from this blueprint, you can also form legislation, regulation, et cetera, that will encourage all parties to move in this direction, and that will also support financiers' work. So this is one suggestion. The second part I want to mention is that answers on financing will come from many different places, actually, and I think partnerships is key here, and it's one thing that I'd like to highlight. And I see different partners here of FMOs, for example. Let's start with the private sector itself. So, for example, FMO is financing a cooperative in Côte d'Ivoire who is processing cocoa beans on behalf of 140 smallholder farmers. They're doing sort of the initial processing. We actually, and talking about the energy nexus, we actually financed a solar project for the processing. So actually, you've integrated this agriculture nexus through an initiative that grew up privately. So that's a fantastic example. From a resilience perspective, FMO is partnering with SNV and with WWF and climate fund managers on the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, also supported by the ministry, or actually initiated by the ministry. And this is also, again, unique partnership. So it's about identifying the problems on the ground. And this is SNV and WWF's role, who are locally based, who know what's happening. And basically building up the investment so that you can finance it, and that's what we're doing then as FMO and as climate fund managers for water and agriculture in the countries that we're working in. So that's another type of partnership. And then I'd just like to know also that one other way that FMO is financing investments is through local financial institutions who also have this linkage with the local agricultural sector and with even retail customers on, climate resilience and mitigation, actually. And there you can take, a lot of countries are developing taxonomies now. So, the EU was one of the first, but then came South Africa. A taxonomy is another roadmap for a bank, for example, to know where to invest properly. And you can just hand it, it's almost like a list to your banks, to say, this is the kind of deal that we want you to support to move toward these efforts. And when we then finance a bank, which we also do, we give a loan to a bank to on-lend, we'll also be, we'll be certain that our investments are going toward the right thing. So that's another type of partnership. So we have so many sources of money. And the last one I want to point out is actually FMO last week announced a big new initiative where we announced the launch of the SDG Fund, which is a fund with MacArthur Foundation serving as a first loss capital provider, FMO then in a junior tranche, and then Allianz, the big insurer, providing a senior tranche of $1.1 billion or euros, I have to check that. But the point is that all of that money, this is the scale part, they trust FMO in our investments, and now they're co-investing alongside us to mobilize more capital. So working with partners who have experience and then scaling that up to continue to build on these models that actually work is another way of scaling the NDC model. So I hope that gives you a few ideas. Moving on to the next panel, and I look forward to hearing from our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. So now I would like to invite up, fresh from a long flight from Hong Kong, I believe, and great you've made it here in time, Roland van der Vorst, the CEO of Carbon Bank at Rabobank. If you could kindly come and take your seat. And I don't know, do we have... Yeah. A last minute switch. I don't know, do we have Reshma Shah, Head of Sustainability at Equity Bank, with us? Don't think we do. So at the moment, what we'll do, we'll be a little bit flexible, if that's okay.
Great.
Roland will go with the flow, when we will invite others from the previous panel to also, we'll weigh in from the floor, but we'll invite you back in a minute for perhaps a deeper exploration around this scaling element. How do we take some of these opportunities that we've heard about, how do we get them to a greater level of scale? So Roland, going to you now, if I may. I mean, from the perspective of Rabobank, you know, big financial institution, what types of policies or incentives do you feel are really needed to stimulate your investments into sustainable alternatives? And if you can help us really on the scale side.
Yeah, and maybe, so first of all, it's a very bad movement in terms of diversity that we switched roles. Sorry for that. But Suzanne asked me, really, do you want to do this? I say, okay, of course I want to do that. So it's, let me start with a story, a small story, okay? So 3.5 years ago, I was head of innovation for Rabobank, which is a big food and ag bank. And at that time, so that's 3.5 years ago, I read this article, scientific article, that said, within 4 years, so that's 3.5 years ago, says now, within 4 years, it will be possible to measure from the sky with satellites at a very granular level the growth of a tree. And then we thought this is interesting because, of course, when trees grow, they capture carbon. We have too much carbon in the air. I don't have to explain that. And then we start thinking there are 500 to 800 million smallholder farmers in the world. And if we incentivize them to plant some trees on their land, so develop agroforestry, agroforestry is one of the best solutions for a resilient food system. Why? It captures carbon, it's good for the biodiversity, it's good for the soil. So if we are able to incentivize smallholder farmers, put some trees on your land, we measure from the sky the growth of trees, we turn that in a very high qualitative carbon credit, and we sell it to companies that are very, very, very serious about reduction, then we have a business model. So that was an idea 2.5 years ago. We turn it into an idea, into practice. We have now onboarded 250,000 smallholder farmers within 1.5 years. We go to 700,000 next year. We want to go to 10 million smallholder farmers in 2030. 80%, so 80% of the carbon credit that we sell goes to the smallholder farmer, which is a substantial increase in income. It's good for the land, and we take carbon out of the air. So win-win, we think. 10% goes to Rabobank, 10% goes to our partners. This was an idea, it's now a model, and we're scaling it. So this is, I think, in Uganda, in a lot of African countries, it's a I think, a high integrity carbon credit, which is very good because a lot of money is flowing into smallholder farmers. But still finance, okay? It's very difficult to finance smallholder farmers from a banking perspective. Why? It's risky. We don't have the data. Bankers want data. So we don't have the transaction data. It's risky. Long tenures, which is also making it very difficult. So what we did is the following. So we're setting up a fund, FMO. It's also pitching in, hopefully, but we're talking to them, a lot of other countries, organizations, of 200 million euros. And what does that fund do? It pre-finances the seedlings for the farmer. Okay? So it makes the investments of the agroforestry project possible. And investors are being paid by selling those carbon credits. So part of the sell goes to the smallholder farm, part to the investor. And when the loans are terminated, then of course the farmer gets 80%. And this is, I think, extremely interesting. Why? Because suddenly big companies have a relatively stable way and a certain way and a safe way to let a lot of money flow into smallholder farmers, because they have the idea, okay, I'll be paid back on the base of carbon credit. So the finance solution is there based on...
So great,
Yeah.
Roland. It's great, you know, with an empty chair here,
Yeah,
we
it's
can
easy
have
for
a
me.
bit more
Yeah,
of a
it's easy for me.
conversation. No notes and other panelists.
Maybe we ask Suzanne.
We can go with the flow a little bit. So why is it, Roland, not, and if you would rather push this question to our other former speakers, or if someone in the audience has a perspective as well, feel free to put your hand up. Why is it everywhere I go to, I still hear from smallholder farmers, we can't get the right forms of financing that we need? And why do I hear so often still from the lending side, it's too risky, they're unbankable?
Well, the point, the riskiness has to do with, first of all, it has to do with data. It has to do with climate situations. It has to do with lack of collateral. I mean, it ticks a lot of boxes why it is risky. And the point is, there is smallholder farm financing, but you have crazy interest rates. So, I mean, that's the whole problem. It doesn't help the smallholder farmer really, because he has to pay these crazy interest rates. That's why we have to be very creative in letting big chunks of money flow in, and I think finding new ways of de-risking, like what we do with high qualitative carbon credit. Find new ways of de-risking.
So I'll turn that question a bit beyond just you, Roland, and to others as well, because I do wonder, I hear the high transaction costs. I heard on a panel, I believe yesterday, the complexity of just to do your due diligence on those that you're looking to lend to is so expensive. It's just not financially viable to do that.
But that's the data point.
In small tranches, and yet we've got so many of these now. Adoption of these, inclusive availability of these is really accelerating as well. So isn't that bringing down the transaction cost, and what can we do to bring it down further to really accelerate this transition? Roland, if you want to come in on that one, and other panelists, please come up as well. Carrie, please join us back up here.
Well, I hope I don't have to answer other questions. But,
I'm afraid you might. You may.
No, I just wanted to say that another program that FMO and the Dutch government actually support is Nazar Plus, which actually the EFSD Plus, EFSD will also support now to come to Nazar Plus, which is basically a guarantee facility that provides guarantees to financial institutions to on-lend for specific purposes toward what they consider to be high-risk groups. And in that way, the idea is that, and it's worked so far, that's why EFSD is scaling it up, and toward climate resilience also, that's why I raise it, is because there's sometimes also a perception of banks that this is a high-risk group. So they're actually targeting like refugees, for example, in this, who want to be entrepreneurs. So really what's considered to be a high-risk group for a typical bank. And showing them with this guarantee fund that basically, you know, it's less high risk, or helping them come up with products that do suit this. So I think solutions like this are quite interesting, and the fact that Nazira is expanding into climate resilience is wonderful, because that's exactly, you know, where we need to go and supporting, you know, small farmers. And so hopefully this is part of the initiative.
Absolutely. There's another strange paradox in terms of risky. I mean, most banks see more sustainable farmers as more risky farmers. If you look at it, it's very strange. So if I make an investment in my house and I do solar panels on my house, that'll seen as a de-risking operation. Why? My energy costs go down, etc. If a farmer says, I want to do more regenerative farming, a bank, a lot of financiers say, oh, it's more risky. Why? You have a loss of yield the first 2 years or 3 years. So I think we have to turn that around. Because from a banking perspective, from a risky perspective, of course, if you have a more resilient food system, you're less risking. The only thing we need to do, and that's where I think we need organizations like yours, is make sure that we make up for the period where the yield is maybe less, and that's the only thing we need to do, because we know from a risking perspective, in the end, it's more resilient. And I think this really is a mind shift. We have to tell this story, and I think there's a lot wrong with carbon credits. Okay, so I mean, there's a lot. It is a carbon market sometimes, but if you are good at that, and if you're creating a high qualitative carbon credit, it provides you the benefit today for the farmer to invest in land of tomorrow. So if you do it good, it can help.
Okay, thank you. And I'll turn to you, Pedro, because I know you want to say something. And then Renee, and whilst you're doing that, Vivian, I will give you a heads up. What would be your recommendation to the policymakers and the funders in response to Renee's point around we need better forms of collaboration? What would be your recommendation? But let's go Pedro, Renee, Vivian.
I just moved so that I'm not speaking in front of the of the microphone. But you know, within the initiative for climate resilience that I'm also working on, I'll say that one thing is that, you know, we've spoken about various ways to de-risk farmers. The one important thing that we need to do and start thinking more towards is bundling these various solutions. We've been working for the past 2 years on the development of what we're calling a climate-sensitive credit scoring tool for microfinance institutions. And what we're trying to do is provide the banks with the data, the climate data, which to them sometimes is difficult for them to attain, but also helping them to quantify the adaptation measures that farmers are using in various value chains, so that that can also come in to de-risk further the profile of each farmer. It's solutions like this that need to be bundled in together with insurance, agricultural insurance, that can come in and substitute collateral sometimes, but also bringing in this sort of first loss mechanism that covers this period where you do have the reduced yields. As you do this, you begin to make the farmer less risky to the financial institutions. And it's what you said, you need to cover these first 1 or 2 years, so that then when the farmer's production stabilizes, he's then able to carry this out on his own. So one thing that we definitely need to push, and I'll say it again, is to continue investing in innovation, support the reduction of this data gap that exists in finance for agriculture, and make sure that we're continuing to provide the push that financial institutions need to enter this market as it becomes attractive. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. And Renee, turning to you.
Yes, one thing that I wanted to sort of make more explicit is I think that we also really benefit if we bring water more into the equation. I think that looking from food and water is really a way to de-risk, whether it's durable, available, we're talking about fresh water. A lot of the smallholder farmers are dependent on rain-fed farmers in a way. But the hydrological cycle is changing, rain patterns are changing, so increasingly water is something that we need to take on board when we strive for sustainability in food systems.
Absolutely, thank you, Renee. So less siloing, more focus on these nexus points across the different sectors. Vivian, over to you. Recommendations for policymakers to enable that collaboration to scale impacts.
I would say, just the way I said, it starts with ambitious plans. That's the first one. So even governments have to look at their climate action plans and say, okay, how is this incentivizing private sector or disincentivizing them? And then secondly, public money will never compete with private money. It's huge, the amount of money that goes into subsidies, for example. And how can those subsidies even be used to de-risk? Let's use an example of what happened in Sri Lanka. Now, the problem wasn't that the farmers moved to organic or the government moved to organic and then there was a revolt. Actually, the money for subsidies would have been repurposed to another form of agriculture. Imagine if there was a subsidy for fertilizers and you suddenly take the subsidies out and tell farmers to move to regenerative ag without any form of finance. You're tilting the balance. So how can governments use their own private money to stimulate the market? That, for me, will be an interesting point for government. Yeah.
Thank you. Just in the audience, if anyone would like to come with a question or a comment,
One small comment.
Minister.
I want to join my colleague there. You know, he has talked about data and how you can use data to de-risk the smallholder farmers. I just want to share the experience of Uganda. What Uganda government has done is to come in and use its structures that go up the grassroots levels to generate the necessary data that can then be availed to other actors at a cheaper cost or at no cost. I think this will further go to answer your question. How do we make this financing even cheaper? So that's how we are doing it in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you. Question. Moazam from WRI now. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm very intrigued, Roland, by your the model that you guys are developing. Sounds very exciting with lots of potential. What are the barriers? What are the challenges that you're facing in scaling this up?
Well, everything. If you try something new, everybody's still a little bit reluctant, of course. I think that's the biggest barrier is we've never done it. So why should we do it? I think we don't have a barrier on the demand side, in terms of everybody, because we have the carbon credit we have is of very high quality in terms of how we measure it, and it ticks a lot of co-benefits like biodiversity, social, etc. So on the demand side, we don't have a problem. On the price side, we don't have a problem. We started with 25 euros, and now it's 35 euros. So it's so that's good. The biggest thing is supply. So the biggest challenge, even funds, I hope, but I still see we have a lot of organizations saying, okay, we want to chip in because we see the model works. But supply, having scalable smallholder farmers projects, having organizations who represent a lot of smallholder farmers. So first of all, we talked to organizations who represented maybe 2,000 farmers, and now we only talk to organizations who have 60 or 100,000 farmers. So I think that is and we do other stuff as well, but that's the kind of scale we're looking at. So it's boots on the ground, operational. That's the biggest, you can say, okay, we're going to plant seedlings, but it's totally different in Uganda than it's in Senegal or than it's in Honduras. So how can we get things done? I think there is where the biggest barrier is. And there we need partners like Solidaridad and farmers organizations who really help us. Knowledge was also a big barrier. So knowledge on agroforestry. So you can give a farmer a few plants, but how does he know how to really treat them and make sure there's a good system? So we started this agroforestry hub, a knowledge center with scientists who help smallholder farmers. So I think from a risky, challenging point, it's the operational risk, boots on the ground, which is always the challenge. I think that's where the barrier is. But the model in itself works. So I think that's challenging. That's
you.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you, Roland. So it's now my great pleasure to invite my good friend and fellow member of the Practitioners Network, the president of the Practitioners Network and CEO of Expertise France, Jérémy Pellet, up to the podium to give us some concluding remarks. Welcome, Jérémy.
Dear Minister, dear all, thank you all. I took plenty of notes, so I'll have the challenge to conclude. Just to say, and you mentioned this, Simon, that I'm speaking today in my capacity not only of chairman of Expertise France, the French technical cooperation agency, but also as chairman of the association representing 24 cooperation agencies in Europe, 17 members, the Practitioner Network for European Development Cooperation. And one of the key objectives of the Practitioners Network is to make sure that we all work better together and that we increase synergies in our partner countries to make sure that we reach the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of our tasks since the Paris Agreement, of course, is to support in practice the drafting and implementation of NDCs in our partner countries. I think that the first lesson today and the Vivian's advocacy was clear. We need to have ambitious NDCs on food systems. Definitely, NDCs and what Kerry Wolzak was saying, we need a good roadmap, and the NDC, of course, is this roadmap that should give the direction for everyone. So we need a good NDC. We need more money, definitely. It's good to see that we have more money coming, public money. Minister Bueno mentioned the support of the National Development Bank in Uganda. We've been talking a lot about private money, de-risking, a lot of interesting discussions about how to create the right mechanism for creating this de-risking solutions. Maybe just a word to say that it's clear that energy and food systems are highly intertwined. One cannot be tackled without each other, and this energy transition and access to renewable energy, they are key factors to more resilient food systems. And for that, we need to convince everyone that I think resilient food farmers are actually good risks, and not the opposite. And actually, because it goes both ways. I mean, it's clear that food security contributes to climate change, but climate change also contributes to creating disruptions into the food security system. So there's clearly a bad circle that we need to break. Practitioners, members have been very active in promoting a sectoral nexus approach to fight against climate change impact. Maybe in that regard, I would cite an interesting project that we've been carried on with the EU, with German government, implemented by many European agencies, Expertise France, FIAP, CGIAR in Latin America, called the Euroclima. And an interesting fact of this cross-cutting program, it's that it addresses climate change under a very specific thematic, including the resilient food systems in Latin America. And the lessons from this program, I think, is that you need to invest in very local solutions. You need to invest to have this innovation coming from the ground, to deliver models that correspond to the real needs of the population. So the big challenge is how you move from the macro perspective, the NDC, etc., to the micro. And that's clearly where we need to have a common approach together, making sure that all in our capacities, the technical partners, the financials, the private sector, the government, the public bodies, all goes together and make sure that the whole ecosystem actually is structured. And so we need to have the right collaboration between the different stakeholders. This is clearly one of our goals, to make sure that technical, financial cooperation partners, private sectors, donors, go together for a just and fair transition, for innovative ways to finance and to accelerate the transformation. And that's actually the only way to achieve SDGs. And to make sure that we finally come up with more resilient food systems in our country. So actually, with that in mind, I think we had plenty of good examples on how to move on. So let's now act all together and continue the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. So with that, all I have to say is thank you for joining us. You could have gone to many, many other panel discussions, so thank you for choosing to be with us, and to our great speakers and for the great discussion, a warm round of applause and thank you.